Welcome, young, old, indifferent, however you are. Welcome to a new show on the Pommy channel. We've got Pommy Ponders. We know I like to think, talk rubbish. I thought let's make a dedicated show. And who better? I don't often say this, but is an inspiration of mine. A man that's amassed over 26,000 followers on YouTube, probably the godfather of what I do. I've got the great Jesse from True Footy. Good day to you, Jesse. How you doing, mate?
Well, thank you, mate. Thank you for a very flattering introduction. I appreciate that. It's very kind. I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I'm very keen to get stuck into it. I think this is our first collab, and I feel like I've known you for years. It's bizarre, but it's good to be here.
Yeah, I think we did a best 22 combined West Coast out and about 3 years ago.
Of course we did. I forgot about that. Yeah, okay, good. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, I remember doing it. It was a long time ago, though. But, I mean, obviously, Jesse, we're going to go straight into the practice games. As everyone comes in, we've got James, Travis, Lockie Jack, who named the penguin that isn't behind me yet. James, Peter, good day to all you guys and girls. Obviously, we've got the practice games. Now, I've come into the practice games this year with a little bit of a different mentality. Years ago, when Carlton were in their dark ages, you needed to get the wins kind of for momentum. So it felt like the practice games were a lot more important than how I feel now. Now, you, Jesse, as an Eagles fan, you've been both ends. You've been flag winners. You've been at the bottom end of the pool. How do you view the practice games? Like, do you view them any differently now you guys are struggling, or do you guys just view them in just a practice game?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the overarching answer is it's got to be seen as a practice game because, particularly my time following West Coast, when they've been good and when they've been bad, we have never really had a performance in a practice game that was compelling, nor did it ever really correlate with how that season's going to go. So you have to be relaxed. But what I will say for West Coast fans right now, we were kind of looking for signs in yesterday's derby, maybe subconsciously. We were looking for evidence that things are going to be different this year. And we kind of just saw what we kind of expected to see based on last year's form. And I think what comes down to it is we just don't really have trust with West Coast right now. We don't trust that that's just a preseason game. So we still need to temper our expectations and just chill out. I know I'm answering just about West Coast at the moment, but generally speaking, preseason games are preseason games. And they do produce wacky and weird results all the time.
Well, they do. And how did you get about watching it? And everyone in the chat answer this. Do you watch everyone? I know you are an AFL nerd like me. So you don't just watch your team. You watch every other team. You're a student of the game. How did that go? Because you are currently in my home, England at the moment. So that makes it very hard to watch these games. Like if you've watched any practice games, full commitment, 4 a.m. for a mess about game.
Yes, true. Look, I'm not going to lie. Okay, this particular week, I haven't caught all the games, so I've had to sort of catch up. And at the moment, I'm working on a review of how the preseason games went. So I've still got to do a little bit of that catch up. And I don't think it's necessary for this week to have watched all 8 times 9 games, like all the 8 quarters times 9 games. There's so much action going on. I did watch the Eagles game. It was on a good time for me, but for the rest of it, it's kind of just looking at what's being said out there, what were the interesting things from each game, looking at highlights, like who's starting at stoppages, like Isaac Rankin's playing a bit more midfield time. Like those are the things I'm going to focus on in terms of my review. And like I think when the season starts, I've done generally a good job of catching every game. And there is actually just a lot more content out there these days for to catch up on the game. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if you didn't see the preseason game, like there would be one article about how the game went. But now there's so many different avenues to access what we need to know from each game. So, like I said, I haven't caught all the games in their entirety for this preseason yet. But when the season starts, I'll do a better job of catching them all.
I've got to say, it's quite easy because when I first started, there was like you and Caden, Cardman, and you were probably the only one that focused on condensing games to bite size. The other two focused on more entertainment, I would say, not downplaying what it was. But it's crazy now when you're doing research. There is like every club has at least 3 of us analysing the game. So you can kind of cheat as well, can't you? I often, when I'm doing my previews for other teams, go and see what they've been saying to try and help my research of finding bits of the play that mirror up what I'm trying to talk about. So it is quite good for fans, isn't it, that YouTube has come into our lives and we focus on what we love, and that's our teams.
Absolutely. And I do think the advent of like club focused content is really helpful too, because you just get a much better nuanced view of what the fans think. You know, if somebody's been struggling for a long period of time, you're probably not going to find that on an article about how the game went, but you might go onto whether it be Blue Abroad or anything else, and they'll find really specific comments about how a player is going in a certain role. And there's just so much more insight to be gleaned. And making content about games that we haven't necessarily seen, like, it sounds like it could be dishonest, but I think you just have to set the framework of like, what am I trying to do with this content? I'm not trying to say that I watched the game and lie. But what I'm going to try and do is find the important points from the game that you should know, and package it in a way that somebody who didn't catch all the games can catch up on the whole round of football in 5 minutes. Like, getting that angle is right. And of course, it's actually literally impossible to have watched all the games because a lot of them overlap. So finding that way to be efficient and honest and helpful is an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Darren here. I'm about 7 games in all the way through, playing it through, doing things like being a dad. But it is a good distraction, I've got to admit. It is a good distraction. But this is a good comment by Jack as we get into the individual games. I agree with him here. Further to my point that I asked you at the start, this is kind of a Kickstarter for some teams, because there is some teams, like he's mentioned here, Richmond, North 1000%. It's kickstarted their year. And I do want to focus on Freo, because I did watch the game purely because of you, Jesse. I thought I need to make sure I watch the Eagles. I've got an Eagles guest on, so I've got to make sure I'm knowledgeable. I was really impressed by big friend of the channel, Pommy Oz favourite, Cooper Simpson. He had a good little cameo for Fremantle, and that was a really competitive game. Like, I watched that game, and the takeout I had of that game is the media were saying it's a practice game, but almost straight away, people were picking on Harley Reid, didn't have 48 touches, 8 goals, and 12 tackles. Now, tell us about Harley Reid, because I personally thought it was a pretty good game for a guy that's come in with, in my opinion, the worst media in the history of a pick one, because the media have panned that kid before he turned 18. So the pressure was on him. I thought he handled it pretty well in a new position as well. That needs to be focused, new position.
I agree. Yeah. And, it's already started. And I don't know if it's just because I'm an Eagles fan, but like, it feels like West Coast are getting targeted a lot in the media over the last few years, and rightfully so in some cases, but it's just like, he was the shiny new like prospect, and now he's playing, and you can see that he's sort of getting judged against like either other massive top prospects or established players, and they're holding him to a higher standard than what we should probably be holding an 18-year-old to. And it doesn't matter that he didn't necessarily have 30 and kick 3 in his first preseason game, and like you say, in a new role as well. But what we did see was a few good signs. I can think of 2 passages where he took a kick out, he grabbed the ball, and he sprinted around the man on the mark. And, his burst pace is actually really impressive. Like, he's got so many attributes. His speed and line breaking ability is definitely one of them. And then there was another really good bullet pass he did. There was a couple of moments where he took on the tackler twice. He got caught holding the ball. And my thoughts were, the first time he tried to take on Caleb Sarong, who is really strong pound for pound. For a small guy, he's actually a really good tackler. And it came up short, and that's fine. He's testing his strength, and we like him taking the game on. And then there was another one where he got caught holding the ball where he pretty much had nowhere to go anyway, and he decided to take on the tackler and failed. So I'm happy to see him express himself, and we also know that the team wasn't functioning particularly well, and we hope that improves when the season happens. But that also makes it harder for an 18-year-old kid to play well in a team that's not playing well. So I saw nothing about his form that concerned me, and I think that the inevitable pile-on from Facebook trolls and, hopefully not like the West Australian newspaper, I think that's inevitable. So we're bracing for it.
I found it bizarre. I mean, I thought he was I have some nerd numbers, but he was the 6th most attended at centre bounces, bearing in mind he's 18, right? And to be fair, no disrespect to West Coast, but that was probably the worst centre clearance performance I've ever seen from a football side, albeit being pre-season. So he was very overrun. But I thought some of the standouts no one talked about for the Eagles. I enjoyed Jaden Hunt's game, and Harley Reid did take some kicking, so a bit of responsibility. But I really enjoyed Jake Waterman's little cameo as well. I watched that game and I thought Fremantle were probably the worst team for West Coast Eagles to play, because they're another team the media are sacking the coach and saying Fremantle are done. So if they'd lost that game, the media were going to sack Longmuir probably before round one. So I thought there was some nice little takeouts for you guys. And I mean, do I think you're going to win the flag? No, but I don't think it was as bad as a performance as what the media were making out going into that game. I thought there was some signs for you guys.
I agree with you. I appreciate that take because the pylon has happened a little bit, from some Fremantle fans, not all of them, and certainly some West Coast fans. There's West Coast fan frustration out there, as there always is when we lose preseason games, and it happens every year. It's like clockwork. So that is a refreshing take. One of the other few things that gets missed about yesterday's game is that at halftime, the score was competitive. We were clearly the worst of the two teams, but we were, holding our own, not in clearances, but in most other metrics, we were okay. 2 goals down. Fremantle actually put 8 new fresh players on the field after that. And then the difference in the ability to run and gun and transition was quite clear. And you'd expect Fremantle to be more advanced than us anyway. And I don't think it was a good third quarter, but I think we got pretty tired. And I hate to say it, but we've got about 7 best 22 players who missed that game. And, injuries are not a great excuse because we're sick of hearing about it. But West Coast depth is not good either. And so my point there is you could probably take the 7 best 22 players out of Collingwood in a preseason game, and they probably wouldn't get slaughtered, hypothetically. I know they did lose to North. But with West Coast, the underbelly is so soft because of years of lack of draft picks and stuff that we got badly exposed. So when you factor in the greater context, the third quarter wasn't great. I thought overall it was good, and I would agree with you that Hunt and Waterman were standouts for me.
Mate, I agree. And I think this is a good comment here from Rowan. This is what I always talk, and we're going to talk about the media a bit later in the show. But players like Dacos, another one's mentioned, Kai's mentioned Sheasel, stat padding down the back. I actually thought when I watched Reid, he's not coming into a free-flowing side. I reckon if you put Reid in a very free-flowing side, North don't have an exit out of D50, so Sheasel's going to get that ball. You guys do. That's one place you've got abundance of talent, runners off halfback, so Reid's not going to get the easy job. I think that needs to be put in perspective that he's learning a role that he played about 12 minutes as a junior playing. This isn't like Dacos, who did rest halfback, or Sheasel, who rested halfback. This is a guy that was a bona fide inside bull, who is now learning his trade in a team that's getting peppered. Like, that needs to be put in perspective. He's not used to defending. He's going that way, winning you games. So I think, in my opinion, seeing what you guys have done, this will make Reid a better footballer in 3 or 4 years' time than playing him on the half-forward line and him being starved of ball like Cam Rayner was when he came in the system. He just never found the ball because Brisbane weren't very good.
Agreed. I think the worst case scenario for Reid is if we played him as a deep forward who rotated through the midfield, and if he was getting 7 touches a game, I don't think that's ideal for his development. Like, give him not a total baptism of fire, but at least keep him close to the action, getting those 20 touches a game if he can muster that. And because he relies, or he doesn't rely on it, but he has a strong contested game, and that is what made him a good junior. It's hard for him to translate that competitive or contested advantage at AFL level from day one, particularly in his first preseason game. We saw him shrug off Ruben Jinby in the intra club. That was very impressive. But then it came unstuck against Caleb Sarong. So he's going to need to find ways to impact the game that doesn't involve like shrugging off every player. But, in 4 or 5 years, he might be doing that at AFL level quite regularly because he's pretty damn strong.
May I agree? And I want to talk on some of the other games. And Darren makes a great point here. And this is the perfect game to talk about. Don't look at results and outcomes. You look at inputs and processes. Spot on. And this is the big one for me. North Melbourne versus Collingwood. And I did a video in the preview saying don't look at results. And almost within a minute of the ball been ceased against North Melbourne. I saw comments, North Melbourne might be a push for the 8, Clarkson's a genius, and Collingwood might slide out of the 8. I have to say, no disrespect to North, Collingwood gave up at halftime. Like, Collingwood, I actually thought it was part of their time trial at some stages because it just looked like guys were trying to get Ks in. But that being said, I did think North, their process, they did look like they were going to go a bit more route one. Sheasel looked spectacular doing what he did. And there was a lot of standouts, I thought, for North. But I thought that game was the perfect example. You could see North were going for the impetus of winning, and Collingwood were focusing on processes and getting key ingredients right for their probably the hardest season they've had for a long time because everyone wants to beat Collingwood.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I think certainly on paper, I like what North's done in terms of their running game, like their speed out of the back half in particular. Like Sheasel, you've pointed out, absolute star. I'm so jealous that we don't have a Harry Sheasel. I'm okay that we traded down for Damian Hillas, but still Sheasel's amazing. And I love Marcucci as well. And I think he does have the tools to impact, I'm not going to say as good as Sheasel last year, but with his pace, his evasiveness, and his bullet foot skills and his production, like he just finds the footy easily. As 18 and 19-year-olds, those players are good enough to genuinely make North Melbourne a better team. They have the attributes to do that. So
Mate, I agree.
Yeah. So I'm good for them.
Totally agree with you. And I watched that game and I've been big on Marcucci. In my opinion, Marcucci is the safe pick one. Like in the build-up to the draft, Reid is the X-factor talent. Marcucci, for me, is safe. Like every team has one of them guys. And I think the media, for me, downplay output and overextend on wow factor. Marcucci, for me, is the guy that when a team wins a flag, he's everyone's hero because he just does his job every day, and he'll allow Sheasel, when he moves forward, he'll allow Sheasel to piss about and have 12 touches, but 6 of them will be goals, and it'll be Marcucci getting the 30 balls to him to have them 6 goals. So I really liked what I saw from North Melbourne. They've got a really good young spine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I've caught a little bit of heat, friendly heat. I think my relationship with North fans is pretty good. But I've been, backing in West Coast to finish 17th above North. But the important caveat I'll add to that is that while I think best 22 strength and maybe North's backline will ultimately see them probably falter a little bit this year, I have no doubt that they are more advanced than West Coast in terms of accumulating the talent they've got. And I'm jealous of some of those midfielders. I love Marcucci. He was probably my favorite kid in that draft. So, I wish them well. I genuinely do. Like sometimes when you're bottom side with another side, you develop a bit of a rivalry. I remember hating Melbourne in like 2010. But this year it's different. I've got a bit of a fondness of North, and I really do hope to see them succeed. As long as the West Coast don't finish last, I don't care.
Well, I mean, it's going to be... I actually think the bottom 4 is... Because I said on a video a couple of days ago, 14 teams I think can finish in the 8. But I think the 4 teams I don't consider for the 8 is just as tight as 14th to 9. I think it can literally come down to when them guys play each other. I think it's so tight.
Who did you rule out? Which 4 teams?
West Coast, North. People are going to hate me. Fremantle, no chance. And even though I'm hot on them, I'm probably a closet fan of them, but I don't think Hawks are in the conversation.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I probably have a little bit more faith in Fremantle than you do. I probably only have the 3 that I'd probably rule out, like West Coast, definitely, North and Hawthorn. I agree with that, like young team and just, copped a bunch of injuries. But I had Richmond 3rd last, and yet I still think I see a possibility for them pushing into finals. Like it's a ridiculous comment to make, but there is some real upside there. I just think they're vulnerable to like injuries to stars and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great segue because Richmond was probably one of the talking points. And I thought the big talking points of Richmond were everyone has knocked them out because Dimmer's gone, new coach. Last year wasn't very exciting. They beat Melbourne. Now, I think Melbourne have got internal problems, but I watched that Richmond game and I thought both of these sides need to win. And I thought that was the most important game of this preseason because it was the only game I thought two sides desperately needed the win. I think every other side could have lost it and said either we're rubbish, we are expected to lose, or we're waiting for the real thing. I watched Richmond, and the big thing I enjoyed about the Richmond game, and this is why I'm quite hot on them, their experience shined in that game. But I thought the big thing that no one's talking about, it's the young kids they have kept hidden from the general populace, also stood out. A big one for me is Thompson Dow. I'm a big fan of Tomo. I know he's been killing it in the VFL, but you could see that new style. And there was just elements there for me that they've got a bit of a Hawthorn, but a bit more advanced when I look at Richmond. I think Richmond are going to be near the 8. Like, I think Hawthorn are going to ruin the 8 for teams. I think Hawthorn are going to be that team that mid-late season, they'll start beating sides that are 6th, 5th, because they'll be underestimating them. But I love that game. And I thought Shai Bolton, him coming to become a man, he really stood out with his ball use and his impact on the game. He looks really mature. And I'm looking forward to seeing how they release Dusty, with Shai Bolton now looking like the main guy in that interim.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many there's compelling reasons for why Richmond's going to do well this year. Like, I've tipped them third last because I can make a logical argument for it going wrong, which is I found harder to do for other teams. I felt like it's easier to make that case for Richmond. But I'm 100% braced for the possibility they're going to make me look real stupid. And good, powerful clubs tend to do that. They tend to sort of belie expectations a bit. And Richmond have become a good, powerful club. There are question marks, I guess, on their depth. So that was probably my argument against them. It's like their top end is unquestionably good. Tom Lynch, Shai Bolton, Dusty Martin, even Prestia, Taranto, Hopper is not a bad midfield trio. Gibkiss comes into the team, but after that it's the doubt I had on the next layer. So I think if they can stay healthy, there will not really be any chance for the bottom 4, I would have thought. But I do think if they cop some key injuries to players, then I could see it all capitulating a little bit. And then there's also the new coach question. So that was my case for them. But, a good start with the preseason. Like, they've already made me feel a little bit uneasy about my prediction, but we'll see.
It's going to be interesting. And I suppose it would be a miss as a Carlton fan not to talk about it. Carlton, Geelong. I want to link Carlton with St Kilda. I know the great Lily's in chat. She's a big St Kilda fan, like my wife.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the big takeout, and no one's talked about it in the media. When I watch St Kilda, I am kind of stuck in my ways with St Kilda. That I look at Ross the boss, and I think Fremantle, boring, 18 men behind the ball. They're going to bore you to death and somehow win. I was really impressed by them starting to... It was almost like Ross realises all of his players are outside runners. They were really direct, really quick. And I watched them and I thought they've got Liam Henry. They've got all these pacey players. They look potent. And then I watched Carlton, and no one's talked about this. Carlton's transition is the big thing everyone hates. But the amount of times they got the ball in the hands of Adam Sard excited me, because that was my issue last year. Carlton never run it out of D50. And we've got, in my opinion, the best runner in the league with the ball at pace. So I thought they were two things to really watch this year, because a lot of people have panned St Kilda in the off-season and Carlton because of their frailties attacking-wise. I thought you actually saw them overemphasize it this week, which I think both of these sides could shock teams early, because I don't think anyone expects it.
For sure. I think I had, in my prediction, I had Carlton 4th and I had St Kilda 6th, but I do think I could almost see St Kilda more likely 4th than I can 11th. How some people... I kind of have this theory that, there are certain clubs, when we do a ladder prediction, we find it easy to come up with teams who are going to shoot up, and you don't generally get scrutiny for that. So we look and conjure reasons why teams would fall down, and that's the hard part of a ladder prediction, and trying to justify that. And there are certain clubs, in my opinion, that people find it easy with. And, respectfully, I think St Kilda is one of those teams where people are just going to undersell them. I think Fremantle, to some extent, mind you, their performance hasn't been great over the last 7 years. But with the Saints, yes, you can see also in their recruiting over the last however many years, the types of players they've recruited and that pace and skill. So you talked about Wilson as Philippou, Owens was an NGA, but Liam Henry, like they've deliberately targeted these quick outside players to overcome what was previously perhaps a bit of a workman-like one-paced midfield. Like now they've got a few different ways to hurt you. And I'm really intrigued to see how that's going to work out this year.
Mate, Spawn, and you mentioned ladder predictors. There's a team I always pick on, Port Adelaide, because I said it in my ladder predictions. I always have them in the 8, but honestly, I don't rate them. Like I said, they're like vanilla ice cream. They go on every dessert, but I'd never choose vanilla ice cream solo. But I'll never complain when you put it with a bit of chocolate cake. But that's what Port are, and they are one of them teams, a bit like St Kilda. They're always the team when I do a ladder prediction, no matter if they're good or rubbish, are somewhere between the 8th and 14th. I never have them bottom 4. Don't have them top 4. They're just condensed in kind of, I don't mean this horribly, but almost irrelevancy in your ladder prediction, because it's all about the top 4 and the bottom 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we're doing these videos, we're looking to inspire top 4 sides and take the piss out of bottom 4 sides. And then that 5th to 14th, no one cares. Do you know what I mean? No one cares. Do you know what I mean? If I put you there, you don't care, I don't care, we all don't care.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Do you find subconsciously, like I find when I'm like publishing a ladder prediction, I almost try and like foresee what criticisms I'm going to get, and then it starts to infiltrate my mind a little bit, and I'm like, maybe I should tweak this, and I think no, just put out what you want and justify it and leave it. Do you feel any sense of pressure, or do you like the chaos of releasing a prediction and seeing people's reactions?
Yeah, but it's weird for me because as a Carlton content creator, I have a really good relationship with Richmond and Collingwood fans.
Yeah.
So genuinely, then they're always nice to me. Like there's a few Collingwood fans in chat today, and they're always nice to me. And I always try and be as respectful as I can as a Bluebagger. The teams that seem to hate me are Brisbane. Like last year, I copped so much hate from Brisbane fans, but I was genuinely complimentary of them throughout the season. I just used to say they have a bit of Tottenham Hotspur for me, that I know they're going to be around the conversation, but I don't trust them in a final because I know they're going to have their bad game where it matters. They're not going to have their bad game round 3, Fremantle away. They'll have their bad game in a knockout game. And I copped hate for that. And I was like, but what happened? They got to the grand final and got embarrassed. So it's not an insult, it's a compliment. But yeah, where I get, I have it, but it's usually like the teams that I cop hate from fans. I'm like, are they going to like say, oh, Pom 2 years ago said Brisbane are brilliant and now he hates them? Yeah, there's a bit of pressure, but I'll be honest, Jesse, I enjoy the bad comments as much as I do the good ones. Yeah,
that's true. I think people, like in an ideal world, I feel like we shouldn't really be judged ideally. Like, it's up to us to establish that, but we don't want to be judged necessarily on what our ladder prediction is. Just judge us on like the comments that we make and the analysis throughout the year. I feel like there's people that just tune into the ladder prediction and think, oh, this guy's a dickhead, and then just banish True Footy forever.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? It's one of them good ones. You see, I mean, look, Travis, I'm always lovely about you. It was our first time, though. Like you did incredible. I wish I went to the grand final with you, mate. I wish I was in Queensland. It's a milder climate than here. Ours changes too much, but see what I mean, Jesse? Brisbane fans hate me. I can't go.
That was great timing.
I can't go to Queensland. There's like death threats and all sorts. Honestly, dangerous place, mate. I can't remember what I said nasty about him.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Pom. Cup of tea. But we go on to probably another contentious area. Swift mania has erupted in Melbourne. It's now erupted in Sydney. It's going to erupt wherever it goes next. I don't know. But the MCG turf. So last year we had my fellow countryman, Ed Sheeran, came over here and he destroyed the hopes and dreams of many a young AFL footballer with the turf. Taylor's come. They're doing 75%. However, some media journalists are saying it's 100% of the playing field and the outskirts is what's the 30%. We don't know what to believe, but My question here is for you, Jesse, and chat. They're professional footballers and they've got 4 weeks. Deal with it. Like, no one can surely turn down 100,000 people times 3 at the G. For the revenue it's brought. It's $1 billion in the Melbourne economy. What do you think about it, Jesse? Do you think we shouldn't be having these concerts? Or do you think the AFL should preempt it and make one of their stupid round ones in country and give it an extra week?
I mean, that's a pretty good solution you just offered there, I think, if the AFL is going to do that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, the MCG doesn't belong to the AFL, right? Like, it's Melbourne Cricket Ground, and it's like a world-class stadium that we need to use for all sorts of things. I suppose the only thing that would bring up is, like, if the turf's not prepared properly, is it like fit for standard? Like, will players, they're more likely to get injured on it if it's not ready in time? You know, that is a serious consideration, but I don't necessarily think the answer is to say, oh, nah, we won't have Taylor Swift. Not that I care at all about a Taylor Swift concert, but obviously so many people do, and it is bigger than football in many senses. So, yeah, I mean, I as long as we're okay by round one. Like last year, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, did they have less time last year than they do now to correct the problem, and it was all good, right?
Yeah, from memory, we'd already had this set of fixtures, and it was in between the Mickey Mouse, the final Mickey Mouse fixtures, and. Yeah, and to be fair, the turf was noticeably bad because it was, I think it was only 32% told me, right. And it was like noticeable. And without boring you about golf grass, I do know that the bigger the surface area changed, the easier it is for them to embed. So it beds quicker as opposed to little pot patches. That's what the greenskeepers do the same. But I mean, it's not like Taylor Swift was like not happening and then it happened. So, like, my question is, if this is an issue this year, surely the AFL will look at, if this is happening regularly, we do something. Because, I mean, let's be honest, the AFL have added round 0 with like 6 days to go in the round. So it can't be that hard to make something up on the fly, can it?
Yeah, true. And like you said, maybe there's an alternative, like if it's really foreseeable that the MCG is not going to be usable in round 1, you know, is there a gather rounds equivalent, or even just move gather round to round 1? Like, that would be kind of an interesting concept. And there's Marvel Stadium and Ballarat. I mean, it is a bit of an underwhelming way to start the season, I think. Like, opening round's cool, but like, you know, Carlton Richmond, that's the game we're used to seeing, or a grand final replay like we did in the past. I think Melbourne and the Bulldogs, was that the first game of the year? Either way, it was the first round. So yeah, there's a bit of a balance there, but ultimately I feel like it's largely out of the AFL's control. Like, it's a Taylor Swift concert. How many people are invested in that? So it is what it is. I think that's my attitude.
It's an interesting one. And it's good, this poll. I don't know if you're reading my notes on my screen, but I did hear on SEN, they were saying, imagine if they did this in England. Like, my counter argument is what Jesse said earlier. We own all of our stadiums. So all the Premier League clubs own their stadiums. So if they did something like put a Taylor Swift concert on Old Trafford, the FA just wouldn't have a game at Old Trafford the week after. They'd give it a chance to repair if they were stupid enough. But we also have massive complexes for concerts that we don't play football on. It's a rare anomaly that the MCG is the home ground of 12 AFL clubs, isn't it? I mean, that's bizarre to a pom. Just, it's still stupid to me that no one has a home ground apart from you guys, but even you guys share it with the Freo. Do you know what I mean? So it's weird to me.
Yeah, it's just a byproduct of well, it's not a young sport, but professionally it's a young sport. Like, it's going to take a long time before we ever get to a time where every team has a home ground. I don't know if that will ever happen.
No, well, I mean, I don't think it can it? You see, my argument is I think you could, because you do get like 30, 40,000 people to games. Like, even, I mean, no disrespect to Geelong, and this is a team, like my co-host on one of the shows, Faz, I think that's where the hatred from Brisbane fans come from, because he's horrible. I'm nice. But the team I'm horrible to are usually Geelong. And like, if you go to the Alphabeti Stadium, it's Mickey Mouse, like probably one of the worst grounds I've ever been to. It's like a conference stadium in the UK. just with crap pies. But they still pack that out. So there probably is a great argument you've made there, Jesse, that 18 clubs with the investment could probably make 80,000 stadia around Australia that people would enjoy.
That would be interesting. It would be nice not to share up the stadium with with Fremantle. Like we can expel them. They can go back to Subi, build their own 20,000 seat stadium. We'll have Optus.
Yeah. But I mean, no, I agree with you. I mean, like, and it's weird as well because the home advantage, and we've got a great conversation which we can flip to about this, but there's certain clubs that seem to get special liberties at playing at things. And I think before we come on to that little narrative, the injuries, product of design this year, injuries already, and this is before we play on the Taylor Swift G, but injuries this year are astronomical. And this is my conversation here to you, Jesse. Do you think when you look at the AFL, we have 23 rounds, right? Where we actually play 24, but we make up buys, but it's 23 game season for teams. Do you think, one, we play too much football? And is this why the injuries are? Because the season seems to be getting longer. Everyone complains about the fixture list. Is it too much footy that's causing this and not enough rest? Or is it as simple, and I've got a simple fix. Everyone says the fixture list is unfair. It's the biggest conversation. Travis, the Brisbane fan, said Carlton have got a tough fixture now because we've earned the right to have a tough fixture. Is it time that we just condense it to 18 rounds? Everyone plays each other once, and the home fixture is an advantage to the team that finished lower on the ladder. It's all up front then. No one can say it's cheating.
It's a good question. Like with the fixture, that is the hardest aspect of our sport to explain to newcomers. You know what I mean? Like everything else makes sense. And it's like, oh, so does everyone play each other once or twice? We play each other once, and then there's like 5 arbitrarily picked games on top of that, or 6. And like, how's that decided? Oh, well, it's based on last year's ladder, but they don't always get it right. And then sometimes you're home against the wrong team or whatever. Like, it is ludicrous. You know, I'm such a football nuff. I can't endorse a scenario where we have less football, Pom. I can't do it. So there needs to be some solutions for sure. And I think 2 games a season is too much. Like that is too much. One thing I would like to see is to accommodate, like if we're tying it back into injuries rather than league fairness, but if it's an injury thing, I kind of would love to get to a point where we have bigger list sizes. You know, as far as I'm aware, we reduced the list sizes for COVID and they never expanded back out.
Never expanded, yeah. But they kept the same loopholes to cheat the salary cap.
True. And then there's still like SSP and stuff like that. There's different ways of recruiting, obviously. But, you know, I know that the talent pool right now probably isn't deep enough, but if we continue to work on like in academies and etc., maybe we can get to a point where you get our 50 players on a list, and that might sound like a lot, but you know, you'd be able to pack out a reserves team without using top-ups quite effectively there. And then you might get your Dangerfields, who I know is a big proponent of shortening the season. You know, maybe he gets his rest every now and then. And then, you know, there's also the travel burden as well, which is uneven. Like that's another ridiculous aspect of our sport. Not to make it a West Australian thing, but it is kind of hard to explain, like why Collingwood, you know, don't travel that much and West Coast travel, you know, all the time. I'm not making a serious point there, but it is hard to explain, right? But maybe, you know, evening that up, conferences is something that I would feel uneasy about as well. I feel like I don't want to have reduced access to, you know, playing Collingwood at the G, like as much as it's, you know, a hard game, like it's a big game of the year for every team, really. So I've just sort of rambled and ultimately not really given you a solution, but I'm probably against shortening it to 18 games. It's too little. And as content creators, it means the season's shorter for us and there's less work in that sense.
No, I agree with you. I think 2 points you touched on that I really want to focus on. T Mello made the point as well. GMHBA ain't big enough for Collingwood, and that's correct. Like I always say this, can you imagine Carlton Richmond round 1 at Icon Park? Icon Park holds, 40k? You're losing 60k's worth of revenue. Do you know what I mean? So there's that to it as well if you played that at another event. But I always find that bizarre because you're in England, so I'm sure your mates you've made over there are like, what's this weird game that people are playing in pajamas that looks like rugby but looks a bit more like a bar brawl in Lincolnshire? Do you know what I mean? I know my mates, when I went back home, were asking the question. One of them was like, 18 teams, 30, is it a 36-game season? And I'm like, no, mate, no. So then they were like, must be 17 then. Do you know what I mean? You play each other once or something. Nah, we have this. And I remember explaining it. We have this system that is weighted by how you are, but that's what they say. But when you do the fixture difficulty, number 1 last year never has the hardest difficulty. It's like someone 8th, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And 18th usually has the 14th hardest. And the team AFL wants in the 8 has the 18th hardest because it's also a little bit of a drama. And it's the fact that and my mate was like, what, isn't it written down though, how they do it? And I was like, nah, that is what the AFL is. The AFL never writes its rules down. It just tells us the rules. So I agree with you. And I think for me, we should, I'm not against 17 rounds. I'm not against 17 rounds, right? And I'll tell you for why. I think the AFL could make the money by then bringing something in the extra weeks. So like an all-star week, right? Suddenly you say to the players, we're taking 10 games a year off you. What we want from commitment from you is we stagger the bye 1 week. So everyone gets 1 week in. There isn't a bye week where everyone gets an advantage of being 1 game ahead. And having like that, maybe an extended finals break so people can get fit, and having an all-star week. I don't know, Victoria versus the rest. Do you know what I mean? Game. Or something like that, that fills in the interim, which you look at America, and this is one thing, I'd never give the Americans praise unless I had to, but their ability at making song and dance out of nothing is amazing. Like, you watch the Super Bowl, the most ridiculous sport in the world, goes on for 5 hours, we get 60 minutes of gameplay, but I'm an idiot. I watch it because it's fascinating. We can do the same, because I would say Australia's love for the game is tenfold compared to NFL. I think there is options, and that worries me, though, because I feel like Australia's been very slow to get to professionalism. Even though these players are professional athletes, a player does their ACL. In the UK, we're sending to a doctor who specialises in injecting horse DNA into a footballer. In Australia, they all go to the same local GP for an ACL assessment. To me, it's mind-boggling. When a player does an ACL in the UK, they're flown to the Alps to a Tibetan monk doctor who feeds them goat's milk and crisps.
Ayahuasca.
Like, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we've tried to become a professional sport like the NFL, like the EPL, but we still have an archaic mindset. And I don't think it's quite ready, because there is a lot of injuries in there, a lot of injuries already.
100%. One idea that you mentioned there is, or I thought of it while you were speaking as well. Do you think like we could get to a point where we can potentially commercialize like the under-18 competition, somewhat reminiscent of how the college ball in America works? Like you get packed out stadiums for college games or even high school games in some cases. But if we get to the future where this prototypical drafty Harley Reid is much more common because athletes are getting bigger and stronger and better as they come through the ranks these days. Like, do you reckon we could pack out maybe Marvel Stadium to see Sandringham versus someone else in the TAC Cup? Like, is that way one way we could flesh out the season and use those free extra weeks and then revenue is still a thing? It'd be interesting to consider, but all the athletes would be under 18, which would be weird.
You know what? And I'll put this idea to you to piggyback your idea, because I've been a big advocate of extending the list, because I think young players don't get a chance and old players get too much of a chance. Right? And I think we should be encouraging 18-year-olds to play football. We shouldn't be thinking, Dan Hannabury's 42 and had 6 new knees, but he's less risk factor than a 17-year-old kid that has not made state, but this year was a top performer for Bendigo Pioneers in the interim. I would love to see a VFL, an AFL2, where the state league is left alone, and the state league is for undrafted and players who just are making a career in the game. And we have a West Coast, and for me, it's a simple fix for money. Carlton play at Icon versus West Coast Eagles reserves while we're in Optus. The seniors are playing you, and the list is 50. Have a rule instead of this mid-season draft, and we steal state leagues. Force teams to promote from within in their state league system, but all these players are paid for AFL clubs. And I think the big thing they miss is the junior football. You and me do draft content. Why aren't these opening games on a weekend? Lily made the great point. Australians want state of origin back. Why don't we have the juniors play state of origin, literally state of origin? Why aren't they televised? Like, why aren't they big shiny lights? For me, the final of the NAB Cup should be the morning of the grand final. Should be a lunchtime curtain raiser. You see the best of the best playing against each other. Everyone's invested then, because I'll be honest, as a Carlton fan, I used to switch off in September. I'm sure you switched off when West Coast were out. You kind of watch it for fun, but you don't really care anymore. Wouldn't that be great if your team's knocked out? You've got 6 weeks of junior football to watch because you're drafting one of them.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I mean, I think the coverage of the under-18s has come a long way. Like, I'm not sure how long you've been intently following the draft, but like, I think probably since about 2008, I have, like, before I was old enough to really be able to analyze it. But back then, I think I used to tune in by listening to it on 6PR, and I feel like even in the last 5 years, the actual draft night experience has gotten so much better. Like, it's trying to emulate what the NFL is doing to some extent. There's extensive highlights and coverage with every pick, which is a good start. But what we don't have is really accessible access to watching the kids play, like the national championships, like you said. Like, if that was made a bit more of a spectacle in time, that would really, really interesting. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but on YouTube, for me, I think my biggest video for a long time was my mock draft. So the interest online in the draft is higher than it's ever been. And I think the AFL can seriously pull some levers to enhance the coverage on these under-18s because, it's entertaining in itself.
100%. And I'm more invested now in the draft, believe it or not. Now Carlton don't get pick one, because I think the top 5 picks are oversold to us. It's the guys 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 that I think are more exciting now, because that's who we're potentially picking up. So I agree. I think we should do. John Holden, probably one of the most intelligent men I've ever met, has proposed this. So on the fly, if I was the CEO, let's say, how about 17 times 2 games plus 2 buys plus finals? That's 40-week year, 15-minute quarters, 6 on the bench, 120 interchange rotation. Raise their pay by almost double. Why do you need a 5-month preseason? You see, I think this is a good argument, because you look at the UK and European soccer, the preseason, they play a lot of fucking games in a short space of time. It's about 4 weeks, but they play like once every 3 days with the rotated squad. And the injuries are half. I know it's football and it's not AFL, but I don't mind this, Pete. You might have fixed it, John, because I don't mind it, because I would actually say, why can't professional sportsmen play 17 times 2 games anyway? 34 games. You never hear a footballer complain that he plays on a Saturday in Stoke and then has to play in Barcelona on a Tuesday and then play Man City on a Friday. They just do it. They get paid for it. I don't mind that, John. Maybe there's too much stopping and starting.
I agree. I don't mind that as a solution. Shortening quarters would do, like, it'd be weird at first to see like full-time scores of 45 to 38. We get that sometimes anyway, but I agree. And, I can't help but think of things as a content creator as much as I do a football fan. And I just think, thank God, like, if I'm trying to make a career of this, I don't have to worry about not eating in December and January, because there's no football to talk about. So that would tick a number of boxes for me. And if we get the talent pool up, you can have bigger squad sizes. I think that would be cool. I think it's a great suggestion.
Hey, and Brisbane are in. You're not surprised Pommy's against 17 games would get 10. That's why I suggested it, Trav, because every suggestion I have for football, so Carlton win a flag, mate. Vic bias, and so it should be Vic bias. It's our bloody game. We've loaned it to you guys. But no, joking apart, I do like it. Now, we've talked about pre-season chat as well. Is there anyone that you've watched from this pre-season games that you're thinking, oh, maybe I'm wrong, maybe they could be good? Or is there anyone that you're thinking, oh, I've really oversold them, these guys are pants?
I tried to not let the pre-season games really influence my ladder prediction. Like I've done this before where I released it and then pre-season games made me look silly, and then the round one started and all the inverse results happened. Like it just doesn't matter. But that being said, I think we kind of talked about Richmond before. It was one of those things where, again, it is just a preseason game, but they did play pretty well, and they have some really good players, no doubt. And it probably was just a bit of a reminder, like, oh no, Richmond's still pretty good. That one could make me look a little bit silly. And of course, like if we choose to read into it, West Coast, I was hoping. We were all hoping to see a little bit more spirit and improvement. And I know I'm feeling balanced on it. Like I'm not going to take too much out of it. But obviously when you see North beat Collingwood, like you're just trying not to let it get into your head. You're like, no, it's just preseason. So those are the ones. But other than that, the Saints playing way better than Essendon didn't shock me. I'm big on the Saints. And the showdown will be interesting. It's funny that we had a draw there, even though it's preseason. Like, those two teams, that rivalry is going to be fascinating. As far as state rivalries go, there was Carlton and Collingwood this year who were relatively evenly matched. We've got an amazing showdown rivalry. Adelaide finished lower than the Power last year and won 2 games against them. And we could potentially see a showdown final. So I'm excited about that for sure. What are your thoughts?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's hard to take out the practice games. Like you say, it's hard to see because, Carlton have won a Wizard Cup. And then finished 18th.
Against us.
Do you know what I mean? And then finished 18th. Do you know what I mean? So, read into it what you will. But, I did, you know what? I was I wouldn't say they're dark horses, but I was quite hot on them, and it's against everything I am. Geelong. I watched them play, and the big thing that surprised me with Geelong was how quickly they were moving the ball. And my big issue about Geelong is they're another team that are like watching paint stripper take paint off the wall. They are a death by 1,000 cuts, really monotonous. But to see them actually play with a little bit of pace and a little bit of vigor, I think for me, experience is everything. I think people underplay it. I think Brisbane are going to be very good this year because they've got to the final now. They've done everything now but win the bloody thing. So mentally, all that experience is there. Geelong, though, have been there. They've done it. They've written the T-shirt. They haven't really lost any players. They were decimated by injuries last year. I think the players they've brought in add a fresh dimension. I think Geelong, people are sleeping about them, but I'll tell you what, I won't want to play Geelong round 18 on a Friday thinking I've got to bank 4 points to put pressure on everyone else because I think Geelong will beat sides.
Man, I agree. I think I've been relatively confident on Geelong, but I did put them like 11th. So there is a reason for that. I don't think this fall away is going to happen. I think there's too much talent, experience. They've got a cohesive brand that they play week in and week out, and there's just guns all over the field. But the thing that ultimately led me to not put them in the top 8 for me is their midfield. If you analyze the best 22, they've got possibly the best forward line in the comp on paper. The back line's pretty damn sound, but the midfield for me, there's probably only 2 other teams in West Coast and North where I think on paper, that midfield's going to struggle. So the back line and the forwards would really have to pull their weight to overcome that deficiency. But it is possible. It is possible. So I'm not ruling him out at all.
And any teams that you find are in trouble, I agree with Gav. I watched Melbourne, and that really I wasn't impressed by Melbourne. They were probably one of the few teams that I watched this week and thought, yeah, that's a worry. It was great to see Clayton Oliver back out there, I have to say. But I just feel horrible time for Brayshaw to retire. And I think Brayshaw is a very good player. But I look at Melbourne and I feel like there's more going on. Without being an investigative journalist, I feel like experience is one thing. I think cohesion is another. And I feel like the cohesion is dead at Melbourne. And they look like a team that wasn't very cohesive.
I would agree with that. Certainly that midfield forward connection and, even in front of goal, like they don't play like a compelling end-to-end sort of style, as good as they are on paper. And I think Brayshaw is a big loss to their depth. He wasn't in their top 3 mids, maybe. Yeah, certainly not in their top 3, but maybe he was a 4th or 5th string. And, I think you take any 4th or 5th string midfielder out of a team and suddenly a competitive advantage that Melbourne had. It's still probably a competitive advantage against most midfields. It's unreal, but it's diminished, no doubt. And then you add in the forward line issues, and I'm looking at it just on an on-field perspective. They've got to click. They've got to find a way to click because it's been a little while now. And then they've got so many off-field distractions at the moment. Sometimes that galvanizes a club, and sometimes it is exactly that, a distraction. So it remains to be seen. But I'd like to see them in the mix again because I think, for me, that 2021 grand final was the most entertaining, dominant grand final performance I've ever seen. The Geelong one over the Power was more dominant from like a whole quarter, but Melbourne, when they click, are just so damn entertaining. And I'd like to see them in the mix again.
No, I think that's fair. Another team I want to talk about as well is I thought Dogs, because I think Hawthorn have literally lost a back line. I think one more injury to a tall person and Sam Mitchell might give me a call and go, Pommy, you ever thought about catching a ball in the back line, mate?
I nearly got a game from West Coast last year, so.
So I watched them and I just thought that Hawthorn played okay and I could see they were working on stuff. Doggies for me are another side that I have in the 8, but honestly, I don't rate them. And I think their window's shut. And I look, no Bailey Smith, who I feel like is their point of difference. I watched that game and I just thought, in reality, you ain't playing against 5'4" key defenders. When the real stuff starts, you're playing against proper defenders. And I couldn't see, I think the Dogs kicked 70 points that wouldn't happen if they played against Hawthorn's bigs if they were fit. I thought the Dogs just quietly looked pants. Really pants.
I didn't catch that game. The Bulldogs have a funny relationship with trying to project. It seems like they do the opposite of what I say every year, so I'm very gun-shy about making claims about them. I did also have them in my 8. I've been doing a lot of analysis on paper, so that's where my mind goes. And I look at the Bulldogs and, I don't think it's a massive concern without Bailey Smith. I reckon we could see a big year from Riley Sanders, and it would just be one of those years where it's illogical that they lose, a gun midfielder in Bailey Smith and they don't get worse. Their backline, I think, with James O'Donnell, mind you, I think he's just done an injury. I don't know how long-term that is, but I think I read that he did an injury in that Hawthorn game. But for me, it's them forward line that has the upside with Jamara, and Norton's only 24. He's the same age as Oscar Allen. And Cody Waitman and Sam Darcy. I do think maybe their forward line talent gets slept on a little bit in terms of projecting how good it's going to be in the future. What they need to do is to make sure that their midfield and their backline is firing at the same time, that these forwards all click, and that Bontempelli's are still on the list. So I do think there's a precarious list position here for the Dogs. They've got to strike while Bontempelli's there, and I would agree with you that it's hard to imagine that being in this year or next, but we'll see.
Mate, the chat are talking about Essendon, and it's brilliant because we're up to the second last agenda. I've got a surprise agenda to throw at Jesse in chat, but media talk, discourse on narrative. And what I want to talk about here is obviously the great club Essendon. We like talking about Essendon as Carlton fans, and I've deliberately ignored them all show. And every year there is the narrative, isn't there? Essendon have won pre-season. They are the only team that doesn't kick a ball. And for some reason, the media love Essendon. Real interesting, isn't it? Because you're in England at the moment, and I think the English media has a real good connection with the fan base because the nuffies that support the club work for big papers. So there's always counter arguments. So you've got Sam McClure at the moment talking about Carlton are favourites to win the flag, right? But in the UK, there would be a fan of Collingwood who was a media journalist going, ridiculous, Carlton of pants, won't make top 8. And it creates that discourse where, for me, the media always follow the same thing. What do you think about the media? Do you think they drive a lot of this narrative with injuries, turf, some pre-season games? You would have thought it was real. And then also you've got the Melbourne stories that are breaking. I mean, at the moment, it sounds like Melbourne are twinned with a club in Mexico at the moment. It's like something watching Narcos or something. There is a lot of media-driven narrative, isn't there, in the AFL, which is hard to really understand.
For sure. We certainly have reached that borderline clickbait age in AFL media. And I think it's been there for a while in the Premier League. Like, I'm a Liverpool fan. And so I follow like Sport Bible or all these kind of things. And I feel like for the most part, the media coverage of the Premier League has gotten so clickbaity that it's almost unclickable, because I have developed such an understanding of what an article is likely to be before I click it. Transfer news, it's just, I mean, there's some good coverage and talk shows in general, but I'm just talking about like the clickbaity stuff. And the AFL is starting to trend that way, and these hot takes and everything that will drive engagement. Like, some of the things that Sam McClure have said cannot have possibly come from an honest place of logic. It's there to drive engagement, and ultimately that's what he's measured on. So I think this does open up an opportunity for people like you and I, Pom, where we can take a beat and be that voice of reason a little bit. I mean, I'm not trying to self-aggrandize or anything. I just do think ultimately this will lead to an opportunity for someone to position themselves in the media market as actually discussing things as they are, and not trying to push narratives to drive clicks and engagement and stuff like that. I mean, ultimately we are sort of still motivated by the same stuff, but there's still a position there to be taken. And I think the AFL media, or at least the organised AFL media, is starting to get that way.
Mate, I agree with you. And I think Bugsbell makes a good point here, because it's something that, living in the UK all my life, up until coming here, Australia's kind of where England was 15 years ago, where it was popular on YouTube to have thumbnails of I called blooming, Kurt Cobain at 3 a.m. and people believed it. And Sky Sports used to do that all the time. Do you know what I mean? United to announce big signing, and they'd put a picture of Mbappe on the article, and then they'd talk about some guy you'd never heard of. Do you know what I mean? Who once touched Mbappe's hand. And But the problem is, Bugsbell, I still think a large part of the general public around the world still get to this point. They read a headline and they don't even read the article, right? Let alone having the cognitive thought to think maybe this person's making it up for clicks. Maybe he's just saying something to scare us and drive traffic. And there's a great comment here where people talk about the big clubs. Brandon's spot on. The media know if you say something about Collingwood, 17 teams hate Collingwood, one team loves it. So you all read the article because you're either going to take the piss or defend. Same with Essendon, same with Carlton, same with Richmond, maybe to a lesser extent Melbourne. I don't think Melbourne are very popular, in my opinion, but I mean, I don't know a lot of posh people. So that could be it. But I do think we need to, I agree with you, Jesse. We've got an important job that we try and dissect what they say and add it into reality, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's my attempt at the brand. It is an interesting point you meant with like people just responding to the headline. I have started, promoting my content a little bit more on Facebook than I ever have. And oh my God, it's a different ecosystem out there, Pom. I don't know how active you are on like posting on Facebook. It's different. Like when I was a younger man, YouTube was the place you would never, ever go to find an intelligent conversation about anything, right? It was just an absolute dumpster fire, right? And now it's switched, and YouTube is actually for the most part, you find some really intelligent conversation, some good discourse. My comment section is pretty okay, to be honest. I like the community you've built there. But Facebook, I get that people don't know me over there, and I'm reaching a different demographic, and people just don't care who I am, and that's fine. But the amount of comments who will simply just comment a hateful comment on what the title and thumbnail says. So, for instance, I posted a video about how the Eagles became the worst team in the comp. And obviously, it's from a West Coast perspective. In the first 10 seconds, it's established that I'm an Eagles fan at the game. But the comments were all like, oh, hateful Victorian media, blah, blah, blah. This is bullshit. This is clickbait. And I'm just like, bruh, no one has actually watched the video. They're just hating on the title and headline. I realize that's a massive tangent, but it is definitely true that people comment on the headline. And to be honest, I'm probably guilty of it too. The amount of times I scroll through something and I'll look at the headline and I'll be like, I'll try and take something from that because we're just trying to be efficient with our days. And that's a bad habit to get into.
I think you make a good point, and I do think this is a weird thing for me as well. Being a POM, most of our media in the UK is free. So do you know what I mean? Like you don't have to enter your credit card to find out 90% of the articles that are behind a paywall in the UK as well. They've been stolen off someone else who's done the actual hard work and intelligence. So you can just quite easily Google Mbappe's next club, and 1,000 people have wrote articulate articles. I do feel like the media, and it's funny because I do some soccer content here. I've never been copyright struck by the EPL. I did the World Cup series. I used about an hour of World Cup content, didn't get one copyright request. I put 5 seconds of a draftee playing, and lo and behold, the AFL are there going, hang about, POM. You didn't edit this. That's ours. And I agree, James. I think the AFL, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but when people say that there's an NWO and there's like a secret island where you can get indoctrinated doing like devil's spells, I actually legit think the AFL treat its media like that because it isn't accessible. We're the only sport in the world that you can't get stats for. And the media are allowed the whole stats. Every other sport, there is no stat that exists that I can't get for free. AFL, Champs Data won't give it to everyone. They give 12 stats. But the media get it accessed all the time. It's time we had an open book. I
agree. It makes my job a little bit harder as well. I'm sure you agree. I use things like Footy Wire. Like, I think that's a really good website if no one's ever heard of it. But yeah, like it's really hard to come up with like long analytical pieces about things. And then you're just like, oh, he had 15 possessions because that's all I can have access to. I mean, a little bit, that's an exaggeration, but agreed. It does seem to be held in the hands of the media to some extent. But I do think the AFL is opening up their mind to content creators. Like the explosion of their work with content creators and opening up access has been huge. I did get a copyright claim on a Harley Reid video I did, but that seemed to be like an automatic filter. Like YouTube picked it up straight away. And I simply ticked the box saying I've transformed the content. And then within 2 hours, it got fixed. So not too sure what's happening there, but things are getting better.
Mate, spot on. And Herbertron, he does some wonderful things. He's probably done the best clip video. There's a few clip videos around of me by opposition fans. They're not usually complimentary, but Herbertron did put all my meltdowns when we lost to Essendon in a very comedic light. So I always appreciate for that because it was his. But I did want to go in the UK. Got a very good mate of mine working at a top club as the academy director, and he put me onto a website there that blew me away. That is open to access for everyone in the world, and it's basically the Opta data, and you can sign up, and all you've got to do is have an English version of a BSB and prove that you're either a content creator, a freelance journalist. But this thing is amazing. It's £5 a month, so that's $15 your money. But it has every known game around the world, and the teams upload their internal videos because they record every game. And it automatically captures, using GPS data, every time that player has the ball, every time that player's off the ball. And you can literally, because he showed me how they scout report, and it was like literally, it was like name a club in the world. It was like, give me a squad number. And straight away, he was like, here's a 1 minute, 20-second video of his last game with case notes. And I was like, Champs Data has that function because I have seen the back end of Champs Data. I have physically played with it. That has that function. Imagine how much money they could make, but imagine how good the content would go if they opened that up and said, I'd pay up $100 a month for that access.
Yeah, me too, to be honest.
Imagine it.
That would be unreal. Because there's so much time that gets involved. I've really gone away from using footage for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's just so damn inefficient. You know, like sifting through that footage. Like if I'm trying to find like, let's say if I was going to analyze Harley Reid's preseason debut, right? I'd have to go to the only access that's up. I could probably screen record KO, but I mean that's probably
but they've already added things where you've got to use something else to do it because now as soon as it detects you're recording it, it blacks the screen out. Because I tried to use it, and they've now sophisticated it that you can't stream it. So because I go through a stream software, and I used to be able to just crop the scoreboard with the time. Now as soon as it detects that, it downs my stream even if I'm watching it. Even if I've got it open, it detects OBS is working.
Gotcha. Damn, that's annoying. I mean, I've never actually tried to do that, but now I know. But yeah, I guess the point was just trying to find that footage to have, you know, Harley Reid's possessions. That would take me a long time to try and do. So it's just not feasible. And it'd be great if one day we could have access to it. I'm not really sure why we don't. But yeah, I guess for the time being, it is what it is.
And it is funny because Herbatron, like I say, they have that technology. It is the same system. So the system that they use, Champs Data uses the same system. It's an automated system that's in the back end of the clubs. And literally, it was an amazing software because dependent what level you pay as well, it also comes with copyright images. So if you go in as a creator, they actually give you can click for YouTube and it automatically crops it so it doesn't get picked up by the automated spiders, and it gives you permission to use, and it gives you an email saying if there is a copyright strike, you can send and say, I've paid for this, fair use, and bang. And I was like, oh my God, why don't I have this?
Yeah. That is stunning. You've actually blown me away there. I didn't realize it was that sophisticated.
It changed my life. It changed my life. Like literally, it was like players in countries I couldn't name. I could watch them play football. It was so good. And I'm like, I can't even get highlights of a kid that he's been wrote about at 17. Like, do you know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah, somebody like kicks 5 goals on debut. You go to the highlights, you download it from YouTube, and then the highlights reel only has 3 of his 5 goals. Like, what can I do with this? It's a bit of a battle,
mate. It's funny, and we finish with probably the most controversial thing: mid-season trades. So, mid-season trades is all the news. The AFL try and make this great game, like every other game that you see. Are we for mid-season trades or are we against it?
I'm fairly neutral. I know that's a boring answer, but I tell you what, like one thing I actually do kind of like of the idea of Pommy is that I kind of like part of the game is assembling your squad for that season. And if you have your depth exposed by an injury crisis or even just say normal injuries, that's kind of on you. That's part of the game we're playing. Like you need to assemble the squad that you've got. And I kind of like that. That being said, I don't know what the strongest argument against it is. I mean, logistically, I don't know if we'd ever see like huge trades go down mid-season because it's pretty difficult to get someone to uproot like their life in the middle of the season and go elsewhere. But it is possible. It is possible. And it would be kind of annoying as well. Like imagine you are a premiership contender, Bomb, so that is relatable for you. But imagine you're, halfway through the season, Carlton are 9-1 or whatever after round 10 in the top of the ladder, and Collingwood are 6-4, and you're like, geez, this season's going right. And then Tom Lynch decides to join Collingwood and he's in the ripping form of his life, and Collingwood shoot up the ladder and win the premiership. I feel like that would be a little bit lame to see a contender. I suppose it's still part of the game. Like they've got to be the ones that go out and get Tom Lynch. But for me, I like leaving it as it is. But because it's probably not going to get utilized in that way, I'm fine with it eventually coming across, if that makes sense.
I'm with you. I think it's a real good argument. I will answer this. Scott, I lived in the UK for 26 years. And I don't know if I should admit this freely, but I'm pretty sure like I've passed the point of where I can be convicted. I have never paid for my TV license. And growing up in England, I know my grandparents never did. We used to get them pink letters saying we're watching. My granddad and grandma died free people, and I'm sure I'll die a free person for never paying it. They can't do anything. Don't worry about it. It's a pretend debt. Don't worry about it. Rack it up, mate. Uncle Pom says, rack the debt up, brother. Rack it up. Rack it up, mate. But no, I'm with you. You see, my argument why I'm for it is because I don't think enough players get chance. And I think because of the way the draft works, everyone can do it. So my counter argument of why I'm pro for it is, let's think of an example. Okay, so someone like Lockie O'Brien, right? Who, let's be honest, not good enough to be on Carlton's list. When West Coast had injuries, you were playing people not fit for purpose. Like, do you know what I mean? Kids who were way too young to be exposed to that level of pressure. And I think the injuries prove it. You had a lot of young player injuries because of the overworkload. I think Carlton were always going to delist him. I think Carlton might have said, right, we're going to do some back-end trades to trade up and to trade down. Give us a fourth, and you can have him now. Do you know what I mean? And put him on a year deal. At least he's going to protect it. I think Stephen makes a great point about Ruckman as well. You know, it gets to the stage for me that if you're playing a 17, 18-year-old Ruckman in the AFL too early, you could destroy his career. So how many Ruckman last year weren't getting games but were like 28, 29? I think it creates that avenue. I'd love to see as well, this is real controversial because this is England coming to Australia. I'd love to see loan systems. I would love to see a loan period as well, that a club like Carlton could say, Lockie Cowan, he's not getting into the best 22. He's playing VFL. You need a halfback. Okay, we'll loan you a player and you do a swap of fourth and thirds. So Carlton go up 22 positions, but he gets AFL exposure at an elite level system. I think there's so much to do that you could actually make the game a little bit better for injuries, because I think my issue is state league football gets absolutely bastardized by the mid-season draft. And half of these players go back to state league after 2 years and the state league doesn't benefit from it, which protects young players to get second chances. So why don't we try and utilize our list a little bit more efficiently and give players a chance to thrive?
I like that. You make a good point about the state leagues, because I was going to make the point the mid-season draft does sort of alleviate some of those concerns. But if we keep the state leagues in mind, I totally get that point. I like the idea of a loan system. I do think it might have a couple of shortcomings in that. I think it works well in football because you could loan them to another league and certainly another lower league. But when we're talking about 18 competitive teams here, there's a lot of IP as well that could transition clubs, and that makes it a little bit awkward, I think. But, in theory, it works as well because, say, Finley McRae's probably a good example last year, right? He's tipped to be a breakout star for Collingwood this year. But if there's a scenario where he's not getting games because Collingwood are in contention and they got a fit midfield, we'll loan over Finley McRae to win 3 of our 4 clearances in a given game. That'd be a great result. So I'd like to see it happen, although I think it would have some issues around IP. So I don't know. They'd have to work around that somehow. It would be kind of awkward. If
you do get loans between Premier League clubs, and that's why we've got that rule now that you can't play against your opposite, the team that you come from. But I also look at it this way, that if you watch Brodie Grundy, he was never playing at Melbourne. Sydney were struggling for rucks, struggling for big men. Does it not increase their value as well at that point in time? Because we see that in UK, January transfer window, you pay more because the argument is we can't replace him in January. So if you take one of our players, you're paying more. Could that also work the other way with West Coast? If you're you do what Collingwood did really well, where they sold players that were high value but not worth anything to them. West Coast could maybe do that and go, right, okay, Jeremy McGovern, Sydney are in the finals hunt. They've lost 2 key position players. We can get a first out of Sydney because they're in the window with 6 weeks to go. We want to get rid of him, but he's probably a second, third at the end of the year. Let's sell him now. Like, could that not help as well? Driving, because I don't think there's enough player movement, because I don't think there's enough kids being drafted. We're losing it because people are hanging on to shit for too long.
That you make a fair point there. I've never really loved player movement that much. Like I wanted to see more of it as a kid, and then after a while I didn't, because I find like the extreme examples of high player movement, probably like the NBA. I suppose that they're 5-player teams, I guess, but it's certainly in Australia. Like the people that don't follow NBA teams, they follow players, and then they switch teams when that player switches clubs. And the extreme like future of like high player movement makes me think, well, I don't want West Coast Best 22 shifting by 6-7 players every year. Like I kind of like it the way it is, and that loyalty as well is important. The loan system, yeah, that could work. I feel like you probably still have the same counter argument about like it would be annoying if you're another premiership contender and then Sydney gets Jeremy McGovern and who else, and then suddenly they're okay, and they're not paying the price for their lack of preparation for the season. But that's just one point of view. It could genuinely be interesting, and yeah, I'd probably give up Jeremy McGovern for 6 months for a first rounder at this point.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I know it's a new thing, and Petra, I agree. And this is where we see in England teams that are buying clubs, it backfires. So it's another layer of, like, let's just say Sydney are in that position. What happened last year? Key defender's gone down. Ruckman's in and out injured. Do they risk club culture for a taste of glory today? Or do they take their medicine? And the more, I think it's too easy for AFL clubs to keep lists for a long time. I think you should be incentivizing teams breaking it up and not sticking the plan. Because for me, ultimately, the right way to do it is build your list. Is build your list from ground zero to winning it. But the more incentives we can put for people to shortcut it and fuck it up, then makes junior football more important. Because at this stage now, I don't think juniors football is at the forefront because we give away draft picks to North Melbourne. We give away draft picks to other clubs. It should be they are the paramount, and the risk element comes you could destroy your culture.
True. It's an interesting point about that as well with the draft picks, and the draft's gotten a lot shallower lately. And I do realize that's probably because of list sizes, but you know, what do we have, like less than 60 kids drafted last year? And we had, I remember in 2016 and 17, it certainly went to at least pick 76 and pick 77, I reckon, because we took Waterman in 16 with the last pick. So the draft pool, the access to talent is getting slimmer. Now, that could probably improve our state leagues because it means more players in theory would then go play state football. But on the other hand, you probably also lose a lot more kids because if a kid, you know, has the choice between university and playing football, if he doesn't get drafted, there's probably a lot of kids that just go to uni and you know, might try a career in finance. So like there's long-term effects of that.
It's bizarre because this year I said it. Do you remember? And this is the media narrative. Bugs Bell will love me for this, but 2 years ago when we did the draft coverage, not the draft just gone, the year before, Cal Toomey was pushing, now's not the time to trade picks because next year's a super draft. And I remember saying at the time, I think the talent pool is very even and broad, and you're going to get a lot of role players, which ultimately, if you've been watching my content this year, I'm all about role players. Role players win your flags, not the stars. Role players do. The bigger the depth you have there is it. So I actually think this year was the best year to draft because you've got all your 6, 7 out of 10 footballers. So you should have got your stars when you were shit. Real interesting, like you say. And I think it's because clubs are willing to hang on to crap footballers for way too young because they're worried about 18-year-olds coming in and playing too early, where it's really important, I think, you build a balanced list through the draft, which ironically We give you picks as you get better in the role player range. So if you do it right, shit, first rounder 2 years, I get the top players. Now I'm getting the people to help him. Now I'm getting the people to come through later. It's a simple system, but no one can do simple in the AFL.
That's true. That's true. There's less turnover and they're really risk averse, generally speaking. And you know, that bigger list sizes would help that, right? You know, if clubs have 36 to 38 main list spots, where it used to be 38 to 40, like you could flex with the rookie list. You know, if we had a few extra spots on the list, clubs could be more experimental and more or less risk averse, and we could see them investing in talent differently rather than holding on to the guy that has played 3 years and he's got a bit of talent and it seems risky to replace him with an 18-year-old pick 45. So I just want list sizes to be expanded again. I don't know why they haven't been. Yeah,
well, I mean, we've got Bugsbell, who's one of the best. Bugsbell's old school, but would I be right? Years ago, didn't you guys, and I think Ultimate Greatness knows it, you guys used to own your own under-19s and things like that. And I pandered this idea about academies, that they shouldn't be club-owned academies. The AFL should have a central academy, and that's where they give out their compensation picks, and they do it 2 years in advance. So I would say North Melbourne now would have access to under-16s and say, in 2 and 3 years, you guys can take this player, but you don't get the picks now. Because I think that's why the draft is compromised. Because North Melbourne, no offence to North Melbourne fans, they shouldn't have had all that help. Gold Coast shouldn't have been able to take 4 players inside the top 10 because teams need it. And I said the biggest issue this year, Hawthorn have done the rebuild, in my opinion, the right way. They've sold their old players. They've taken their medicine. They've done it right. They've done it fairly. But they've been shafted in 2 drafts for playing by the rules. And that's where we've got a problem. So I think the trade period will highlight more shit teams with shit decisions and shit intelligence. Because they'll start panicking and buying mid-year and ruining their list very quickly. True.
It isn't, not to make this a West Coast whinge, but it isn't worth pointing out that one of the worst wooden spoon teams of the modern era, they got pick 1, they got Harley Reid, but then they re-entered the draft at pick 30. That used to be pick 1 and 19, and that's a big blowout. I mean, you know, over time, the difference between pick 19 and pick 30 might not be that much because we tend to see, you know, good players taken all over the draft, but it's still not an ideal position for the league to be in. And you'd imagine with Tasmania around the corner, talent's going to be compromised even further. So I do think working out the draft system, I think you're constantly pulling levers. Like they're going to probably change the academy system again, which will probably lead to its own problems. But yeah, at the moment, it's hard for some teams to get excited about the draft in the way that they're used to.
Yeah, well, you see, that's why I'm a fan of the mid-season draft, because Bugsbell, I know you love the game. Like for me, I think the big talking point is clubs get too much help for bad decisions. I think the mid-season trade period would highlight bad club decisions. And then we'd say, well, you gave 8 firsts over 6 mid-season periods to try and chase the dream, and you're not here. And I've said this, and Jesse's here to defend West Coast. West Coast are in a shit heap because they overpaid for Kelly. In reality, I don't think Kelly was worth what he was, but I understand the risk. You were in the flag window. Kelly on paper was the difference. Just injuries happened and bad luck happened. But that, for me, I don't think you should get rewards from the AFL for making a risk, because we want clubs to take risks and fail, and we want clubs to take risks and win. When we bail them out, I think it just takes the fun out of it. It should be the best managed team win every year, and if you shit, you shit.
I agree. I'd probably defend the decision to go after Kelly, because I just think any team in that position, you know, we'd won a premiership 12 months previous and we had a weak midfield, and Tim Kelly, a gun WA midfielder, wants to come home. Like everyone does that deal, I think. And what happened afterwards is not his fault. But to move to the next point, like Yeah, I agree that we actively made that decision. We took that risk. And it wasn't just the Kelly trade that's led us to the list position we're in. We gave up a couple of first rounders, but we actually didn't take. We had 2 first round picks between 2014 and then Ruben Jinby in 2022, and those were Brander and Venables, and they didn't work out for various reasons. So it's a stack of decisions, and I agree that we got ourselves into that. And I wouldn't necessarily be ponying up for priority picks, but you also don't want to be the only team that misses out if other teams are getting them, you know. But hopefully we're not having this conversation when the Eagles, you know, avoid the bottom 4 this year, hopefully.
Mate, spot on. And the final point on this is, I'll say this to Kai, I have no issue with academies. I just don't think it's very fair. And this is my reason why.
Agreed.
Hawthorn got pushed back picks. If the AFL had stupidly let teams take Colby McCurchie, who had Tasmanian claims, could have been even further. West Coast, they need picks. They got pushed down, like 10 picks? My belief system is if a player is picked up, instead of doing this points matching, the team affected should gain them picks. So what I'm saying is the AFL just deletes them picks. So Hawthorn should have gone into that pick and said, okay, we've lost pick 3, but we've gained pick 4 and 2,000 points. We can now manipulate the draft and maybe help West Coast out and say, look, you're going to be pick 30. We'll give you our new pick 26 and 28. Can we have your first round pick, your second pick, which is a bit earlier? And little things like that create these things. I just feel like the AFL makes it very easy to be rubbish and benefit from being rubbish. And then you're punished when West Coast will be punished. And I've said this before, because you're doing the right thing now. When Tasmania come in and take the first 12 round picks of the next 2 drafts in 2 years' time, they'll be punished for doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I wonder how the AFL will handle the Tasmania's thing. I've seen it alluded to that they're going to be much more concerned with getting them competitive quickly, which means that whatever levers they pull to get to set up the first Tasmanian squad, it might potentially, maybe not, but might mean that the draft's first round is not absolutely ripped to shreds like it was 10 years ago or whatever it was. So we might see a different look at that. It doesn't mean it won't affect the clubs, but I'm hoping, you know, it won't mean that Tasmania have picks 1, 2, 3, and 5, whatever it was.
Yeah, well, I've said it for years. I think that instead of comp picks, you should get salary relief. And I've said this about Gold Coast. I think Scott makes a great point. I mean, Brandon makes a great point. For me, the way to fix Gold Coast 4 years ago was give them an extra $2 million in the salary cap. Say, attract a superstar, and then by 2025, you've got to reset that salary back to what it is. I think that should be the reward, the help that you get to attract a player. And I think that would help the game, because that means that an aging list loses a star, gains a good pick to kickstart theirs. Geelong, I think, would be in an interesting position if you had that and said to Geelong, look, we've given North $5 million over 5 years. They could maybe start saying, Danger, piss off. Tom Hawkins, piss off. He gets a bumper payday to help the kids, and then they get a good pick. Do you know what I mean? To bring someone in and kickstart their rebuild. I think it's a very easy fix, but the AFL, for me, I agree with Bugs, but I think the AFL are about the story, not the game at times.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it'd be an interesting one. Again, setting the criteria of having the like objective or subjective criteria for getting this assistance is tricky. Like we don't like the fact that we don't know what the compensation is going to be. Like you can't predict it, but at the same time, you don't want to have clubs, you know, tanking to get salary cap relief, because if a big club finds themselves struggling at the back end of a season and they know exactly what will be the path to them getting an extra 5 million or whatever it is, then we could see, you know, maybe a Geelong or a Collingwood hypothetically one day just having a terrible end of the season and then having all this salary cap. And those clubs have the benefit of being able to attract players. No disrespect to North Melbourne, but an extra 5 million hypothetically in their salary cap doesn't mean that they'll be able to attract the absolute top talent, because money hasn't been a problem in the past. But Collingwood probably could, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's a quirky one, but we've got a misshapen league.
Well, I think you're spot on. And I would say at the moment the game's flawed because teams like Gold Coast didn't see any value in their picks because they could manipulate the comp pick system.
Mm.
So they effectively paid for other teams to trade to get better picks. You look at over the last 2 years, and I mentioned this on my draft review, some of the pick swaps are actually a piss take. And I've said if I was a list manager, I would be saying, well, this is collusion. You're ruining the game because you have given them a free hit to get 3 top 10 players and then benefit my rivals, all because the way their picks fell with a point system for that. And that's why I think no one should benefit. I love to see, and I've said this for years, you've got an academy player, pre-selection, so it's locked in and no one can piss about.
Yes, yeah. I just think it would be great if the academies are all somewhat set up so that every team's on even footing to some extent. You know, we don't want to see clubs shafted with their geographical zoning. You know, for whatever reason, I don't know how to diagnose it, but for whatever reason, WA, or the West Australian Academy, hasn't really produced that many good players. I'm not too sure why. So getting that part right would be important if we're going to move down towards more of a pre-selection academy sort of path, if you know what I mean.
Mate, I agree. But everyone in chat, make sure if you haven't, I mean, he has half of Australia subscribed to him, Jesse. You know what I mean? So, I mean, let's be honest. I'd imagine everyone in this group is already a sub, but I'm dropping it in chat now. If you can do me a favor, he's our first guest here. Go and subscribe to Jesse. He does some wonderful content. He's also just started, if you are an Eagle, true Eagle. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to watching that because it's nice to see Jesse not smile so much. And I'm sure the West Coast Eagles won't make him smile, but please do that. Jesse, you are an inspiration. I love you, my friend. We're going to have to do more content together, though, because that was fun.
Likewise, mate. Thank you so much for having me on. This 96 minutes went through in a blink of an eye. It was great chatting with you. I love your channel. And thanks so much for having me on.
Cheers, everyone. Look after yourselves. I'll be back tomorrow because I've got to do a members live because I was a bad boy this weekend and I was helping a friend out in need. So I'll be back tomorrow if you remember, but you'll probably see me in our normal content. So much love. Look after yourselves and we will see you next time.